I'd like to introduce Hamish Darling, if he looks familiar. There's a good reason for that. He's the CEO and Data Protection Officer at Instat Data, and I was just having a quick ramble through the Instat Data's website, which I suggest you do on your phone, just to have a look at that. It's very interesting, and I'm very intrigued to see and to hear the session about what food safety through the Gen Z lens looks like. Please welcome Hamish and the team of panellists.
Otherwise we've got a big voice, so that's okay. Kia ora koutou, my name is Hamish. I herald from a small orchard in central Otago, but I was in the wrong meeting at the wrong time and I scratched my nose, and now I run a small company which does machine learning and data science, which came from a food safety background. But I'm not exactly the main event. We've got three very, very clever food safety experts who are going to talk to us. But today's panel is about what food safety means for the younger generation. Now, I don't know who was involved with deciding what the younger generation actually is and who defined that, but if it were up to me, you would all be up here with me. So we're going to ask a few questions. We've got a quick video which looks into food safety from downtown in Auckland, and what young people say there. And then from there, we've got some, hopefully some good questions and some good discussion coming out of the back of it. So enjoy the clip and we'll get set up.
Kia ora, I'm Kyla Archer from the New Zealand Food Safety Science and Research Centre. I'm here with Rianne on the streets of Auckland, talking to young people about their attitudes on food safety. Let's find out how much they know about keeping their food safe.
What comes to mind when you hear the term food safety?
Probably how restaurants and cafes are preparing their food to give to the public, and what sort of protocols are in place.
The danger zone. The danger zone.
What is the
It's like I forget what they are, but it's like the degrees where, like, if you have the food out like for too long, it's like the bacteria multiplies by a lot.
What do you think it means to have safe food?
Just food that's, well, for us, able to, eat and not able to get sick and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Probably cooked food handled by, a clean chef who's obviously cleaned his hands.
Food that's available that you can buy, like purchase throughout the week, that's not covered in pesticides. Like, I'm really big on
Interesting, yeah.
I really want to grow my own garden.
Is there anything that you might be worried about when you buy or eat food?
Expiry dates, if things have been left out, maybe if things aren't refrigerated properly, or put in the freezer and things like that. Yeah.
And like how long to cook things for, like knowing and not having to Google it every time might be nice. I'm scared of those like bags of salad from like the supermarket, like the bag, because apparently those like always have like they make you sick.
Are there any particular foods that you might be worried about that might make you sick? Any particular food?
I would probably say meats, a lot of meats, just making sure that the meats have been, like he said, cold and then fresh.
Yeah.
And then if you're eating out, cooked properly.
I think it's always good to worry about seafood. And I guess the freshness around that.
Oh, microplastics in a long black. Like if the long black is like, because it's boiling water.
Do you have any concerns about food safety because of climate change?
Not really.
That's okay.
That doesn't really come to mind.
Yeah.
I guess if the climate is getting a lot worse, then it's quite harder to manage the product that we sort of produce in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And it'll be quite harder to sort of maintain the quality of it as well. And, the quality would obviously be distributed to the restaurants and, probably be served and, stable shelf life is probably is actually affected by climate change, I guess, yeah.
Thanks for your interviews, Rianne, and thanks for watching. It's clear that Gen Z have some unique and interesting insights into food safety. Let's all do our part to help keep our food safe and healthy. See you next time. Mā te wā.
Cool. So I think it's a really good background of what some young people think. But I've got three very clever, very capable other young people who we're going to ask some tricky questions to. So on my right, I've got Jess Chong, who is a Senior Product Development Technologist at Beverage and Food Gurus, but also a volunteer and on the board of NZFSSRC. So Jess's day-to-day is in the food safety, product processing, packaging, storing, all that good stuff, and making sure that it gets safe to the end user. Then on her right, we've got Jack Hervey, who is a molecular biologist who did his PhD in Cambridge in biotechnology and photosynthesis, but now works at the Cawthron Institute doing he was explaining this to me over coffee before. It was really complicated, so forgive me if it's totally wrong, but biosensors and understanding algal blooms and the toxins that can result in, like the kaimoana and so on. And then I've got Trevor Waikawa, who's our panellist from the Hawke's Bay today. Hawke Bay. I heard today that it's called Hawke Bay, not Hawke's Bay. So if you don't believe me, Google it. It is actually Hawke Bay. But he's here, and he's got a background in freshwater science, freshwater management, with 5 years as a catchment advisor for the Hawke's Bay Regional Council. He's also a Whakakī Lake trustee and kaitiaki of the Whakakī wetlands. On top of that, he comes from a rural background with a sheep and beef farm in Hawke's Bay as well. So, without further ado, I'm going to direct the first question to you, Jess, but if anybody else has other ideas, jump on in. So from that video, we saw that a lot of young people are really interested in that end of the chain, right? That process, after it's been processed, when it's in its packaging, when it's being prepared in restaurants, not necessarily at home, and they're really worried about that part of the food safety chain in terms of food safety. Why do you think it is that they're talking about just there, not the whole chain? And do you think an older generation would give a different answer?
So I don't know if I can speak for the older generation, but I will at the end of my thoughts anyway, so correct me if I'm wrong. I just think there's a fundamental disconnect between us and the food that we eat. Everything kind of comes in a package these days, and there's not really, unless you come from a sort of agricultural or farming background, or you maybe grow your own fruit and vegetables, there's not really that much connection anymore between how we consume, in general, I think, but in food as well. And particularly in the packaging space, which we've just been exploring in the previous session. There's kind of a lack of understanding, or maybe a bit of like cognitive dissonance around how we can have a long shelf life and safe food for a long amount of time, and then also how the kind of packaging and materials that you need to be able to sustain that, which it's kind of a tricky balance between like the cost and the carbon footprint of things, as well as you can't really use fibres to hold in a liquid. And, you know, just keeping food fresher for longer. And I think as well, there's an interesting lack of reflection on our own food safety and accountability at home. I think we kind of take for granted that our food is safe and we're not going to get sick from it. And you can buy something, have it in the fridge, eat it, or go out somewhere and get food, and you'll be all good and not get sick. So, yeah, I think in terms of would maybe older generation people, that was a weird way to say it, would older people potentially have different answers? I think it kind of depends on their background. Yep. I think if you've kind of come from that agricultural farming background, probably you would, but even just talking to like my own parents or my partner's parents about kind of food safety and stuff in the home, like my dad still washes chicken in the sink sometimes. You know, like I think it just really depends. I think we think about it because it's kind of our job, but I don't think the average public does.
I think also, just to add to that, is what we're seeing now is we're at a time of
very highly processed food.
Totally.
So we've got way more packaging than we ever did, to the point where food gets packaged into a restaurant, it gets cooked, then it gets packaged again and goes into somebody's backpack and they cycle it to us in Uber Eats, right? So you've got a whole lot more stages where we're interacting with packaging, plastic or otherwise. And that's another reason why we're just seeing so much more of it, whereas skip back 30 years ago, we didn't have Uber, well, as far as I know. We didn't have Uber Eats. It's just becoming a complicated supply chain. Yeah, really, really interesting point. Any other thoughts?
It's part of the kind of increasing urbanisation that we're seeing, and that's not a new trend, right? I mean, that's been going on for decades and decades, but it's continuing to occur in that direction. So more and more people are divorced from food production and don't know or are unaware of where food really comes from.
That's a really good segue to my next question. Thank you. I didn't even put you up for it. So we know that food safety, I'm going to direct this to you, Trevor, we know that it comes from, or it starts probably at the farm or at production, right? And this group of people, we talked a little bit about pesticides, but otherwise downtown Auckland didn't really contemplate what food safety means in rural New Zealand, even despite recent news where we've had big culls of herds in the news, and it's still very recent memory, some like the MBOs and so on. Do you think that if we were to ask these same questions to young rural New Zealanders, they would give a different answer? And do you think there is a rural-urban divide in that food literacy?
Yeah, the perfect segue into that, I think, and also coming from two lenses here, Hamish mentioned that, yes, I do have a farming background too, but I'm also extremely passionate about our taiao and environment. So coming from playing devil's advocate here, but appreciation of both systems. There's a significant gap between the urban and rural divide in terms of food production, and there's a passion sitting behind that. Each and every day there are rural New Zealanders in the regions that are living at the livelihoods that are based on growing food for themselves locally, regionally, and now nationally and globally. It's a livelihood that's significantly changed over time, but it's still, as we've seen today, is strong within the New Zealand economy. So I was really glad to hear that's still our primary industries are still leading in terms of the benefits of New Zealand going forward. The gap between youth and I was quite, it's significantly interesting to hear whakaro thoughts from youth these days that are primarily based in an urban centre like Auckland itself. It is not their fault that they don't understand that. It's totally not their fault that they don't understand where their food may come from. But it's also an opportunity for us, as many within the sectors, national government, regional government, organisations to engage with everyday people about where their food may come from, how it's produced, where it's harvested from, the measures and the standards that are put in place. Because I must say, as a farmer myself and representative of many operations across the regions, is that we totally know that New Zealand is New Zealand Aotearoa, and our farms, agriculture, horticulture, we are world leading in those stages. We are world leading because we can produce them in a really sustainable, which produces really healthy, safe food. And there's reasons within that, many things in terms of, from a regulation point of view, freshwater farm plans that set measures that farmers have to meet each and every performance measures, but also because it's a livelihood for them, they don't want to be plastered as the devils or the polluters of the world. So because it's a passion of theirs, it's a livelihood. There's many organisations and farmers across the region that are actively doing awesome stuff each and every day in terms of erosion control in hill country, carbon sequestration plantations, and not just pine. By the way, I'm not going down that road at all. But there's measures and there's roles that each and every day Kiwi New Zealanders are taking to ensure that there's a healthy farm environment, a healthy environment to produce food, healthy, safe food for people.
And just to drill down a little bit more, do you think that's being communicated to the younger generation of farmers coming through? I mean, there's a lot of issues for people our age to try and get into farming, right? I don't know if anybody's tried to buy a high country station lately, but they're not cheap. So do you think that message is getting through to the next generation?
I think there's a total opportunity. There's a total technology. There's social media. We are so much more connected than we ever have been before, and that's only going to increase. There's a total opportunity to communicate that pathway of production, how it's produced, where it's produced, the quality of that, and the environmental works that are happening each and every day in these practices, in these land use practices that occur. So there's definite opportunity for the engagement. However, we do have so much more to do. We do have so much more to do in that.
Totally. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to really pick on you here, Trevor. Okay, take off your farming hat, put on your freshwater ecologist, freshwater management, kaitiaki of the wetlands,
Perfect.
so on, right?
Yes.
Now, obviously farming and farming practices has a big impact, you know, if you think environmentally of eutrophication and runoff into streams and so on.
Yep.
What impact does that have in terms of food safety for agriculture and so on? And do people know enough about that?
Perfect. Yeah, so a good segue, and it's actually something that we've worked on. So yes, taking off that hat, so an environmentalist, and also this is acknowledging some work we've done over the last 3 years with the centre here, as well as Cawthron Institute and Massey University. It's on a project that we spoke about last year. It's called He Pakuauta, He Pakuauta Wai, which was essentially in terms of creating an investigation between what's happened on the land. This is from a small place in Whakakī, Paradise we call it, where I hail from, a small place in the northern Hawke's Bay. It's home to one of the most significant freshwater wetland systems on the east coast of New Zealand. It's called the Whakakī Wetlands, home to over 800 hectares of freshwater wetland, many different taonga species, plants and fish. Within that, over time, and with this project here, we've been able to say, over time, settlement of both Pākehā and Māori, the collective settlement and the land use change over time from the native environment that once existed, forested catchments, beautiful clean green rivers, streams and wetlands, and that land use change over time had a significant impact on the wetland. 12 farms and 3 forestries I'm talking about in one small catchment. Massive land use change, and I'm also not taking a dig at myself because half of those farms are all Māori owned. So I'm also not digging at that, but also there's a clear correlation between what happened on the land had a significant impact on the water, and where I'm leading this to is that what happened in the water is also significantly what's impacting the food resources, which over 1,000 people a year consume: fish, eels, flounder, morihana, carp, and freshwater mussels and crayfish from this very lake. And that's feeding 100 people from our marae each and every event. So coming into a food perspective, freshwater management and what we do on the land is strongly linked to the food safety and what we as people are consuming each and every day.
Can I jump in on that?
Go for it.
So I recently went to Vietnam for a month, and I feel like everyone, it's kind of par for the course, you're probably going to get sick in Southeast Asia, and I did. So we went on a boat tour, and the water was, I don't know how many of you have been to Vietnam, but the water was pretty rank. There was like heaps of garbage floating in it. It was just really cloudy and gross, and they stopped for a bit to let people out to swim, and we're privileged New Zealanders, and me and my partner were like, ooh, I think we'll avoid that, thanks. And they served lunch and there was seafood, and I avoided that just because I figured if I wasn't going to swim, probably shouldn't eat anything from there. But my boyfriend did, and he got super sick. And I also got sick from eating the freshly prepared food, which was like salads and stuff, which they would have prepared with their hands. And I think, again, it kind of relates to safe drinking water, safe fresh water to, you know, produce food with and to wash your hands with and for food to be prepared and eaten. So just, yeah, interesting that I think, again, we just take it really for granted.
It's really interesting. I promise I'm not trying to just show off my global exploits. But I was in Africa not that long ago, right? And
I've travelled.
We all have great carbon
Yeah. We'll talk about climate change in 1 second. But now I'm in a room full of food safety experts, and they're going to tell me that I don't know what I got sick from because you can't tell without going to the doctor and getting it anyway. But I was eating African food for a long time, and when you're eating culturally, like traditionally African, and so I was in the southwestern region of Zambia, food which is prepared in a traditional way, perfectly safe because they cook the hell out of it, right? And it's boiled for a long time or fried for a very, very long time. Now, when I went to a Western restaurant, very shortly afterwards, after I had a burger which was definitely medium rare, which is not great in the African climate where the refrigeration turns off half the day because of the rolling blackouts and because, you know, they're not used to necessarily cooking Western foods, lo and behold, I got sick not long after. So it's really interesting understanding that cultural divide where, okay, people trying to cook for foreigners are more likely to make them sick than cooking in those culturally known and proven methods that have lasted, hundreds of generations. So yeah, interesting thought, but it wasn't a flex, I promise. We're happy. We'll move on from there. Okay, right. Let's talk about climate change now. So, Jack, what do you think? How important do you see food literacy as being? That seems to be a common thread of what we're talking about here. And how do you see? Oh, I'm going to park climate change. I'm all scatterbrained. So, food literacy. How important is it? It's a common thread. And do you think that new technologies, machine learning, AI, what you're working on sounds super interesting in terms of being able to get it out to the masses. How important do you think that technology is going to be at bridging a gap in terms of food literacy?
Okay, I think food literacy is, critical, but I also think if we think about the video that we watched, that some of it has to do with choice of wording. That's not a criticism of the video, but it's very difficult to take a single term like food safety and have it broadly encompass a huge range of issues. We touched on food production versus food handling, and it seems that food handling is what most people think about when they talk about food safety. Whereas I think you get very different answers if you were to ask people about healthy foods, or if you were to ask them about safe food production, or any of the, if you chose different words, you get different answers to those questions. And I think that feeds in significantly to the literacy piece, is how do you communicate that food safety is about more than just what you do in the restaurant or what you do in the kitchen or something like that. And that brings the emphasis back down to education and information. And if we're talking about Generation Z or young people or however you want to split that hair, then we're talking about people who have been described as digital natives. They're absolutely overwhelmed with information, and that is both a huge blessing. You've got massive amounts of information available, but also massive amounts of misinformation. And how do you separate what is good from what is not good? And that brings us to things like AI. AI is a tool, and it's an incredibly exciting and interesting tool, and that it has that potential to sift that information and distill down, fact from fiction, and how you can actually, process useful data from the deluge.
Yes.
But then AI is kind of like a sewer. To misquote a famous musician who said something else, but what you get out of it depends on what you put into it. And again, this comes back to data and information. So AI doesn't create information de novo. It is not we call it generative, but it's really reprocessing what is already known and already there. And that's where research is absolutely critical, because you need that reliable information source to feed into those models. And then you have a considerable amount of trust going to the people who are developing these models, such that you trust that they are training those models on useful and reliable data sets, so that you get useful information out of it at the end. Yeah. So I think it's a super exciting time. I think there's a lot of potential from new technology, but you still need to keep funding scientists like me, so that I can make the data that goes into them in the first place.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's on the nail. I deal with machine learning AI all the time, and it's often misunderstood, and we often think that it's going to be the silver bullet, but it's absolutely not. That key data going in, that key cultural understanding going in, all of that that's really important. Okay, let's talk about climate change. So we did discuss, or we heard about it a little bit, and it's quite a broad question, so anybody can answer, but I'll start with you, Jack. Do you think that young people really understand, really comprehend how big of an impact it's going to have on both our food supply chains, but also the safety of the food when it gets to us?
Again, I think it comes back to that difference between the understanding production versus handling. And I think if you include food production in that food safety lens, then again, I think you get different answers from people on that topic. I think climate change has the potential to affect food production almost more than any other thing. That's by far the biggest impact. That we are dependent on the climate for the production of food because we grow food, and if you can't grow food, then we're in rather a major problem. The other major impact is sea level rise, but again, the main effect from sea level rise is likely to be displacement of populations, but displacement of arable land where you can no longer grow food. So there's again that divorce between knowing where your food comes from, and I think in more developed nations or OECD or again, whatever the most politically correct term for that is now, I don't remember. We don't understand where food comes from, and so we don't see it, it just appears on our plate. I also wonder whether in a country like New Zealand, where we actually export a lot of our food, whether we see food more as an economic resource than something that we rely on to actually eat. So again, I think if you were to ask young people in different countries about how they see climate change affecting food, I think you'd get really, really different answers. And I think in New Zealand, maybe we just don't see it because we're not connected.
I think kind of related to that as well, food safety, if you look at it from a food availability lens, going to be more expensive, and considering we're already in what the young people call the cosy lives, cost of living crisis.
It's new to me.
Well, considering that and the availability of food already for people who are struggling financially, I think that's something that I don't even think all of us in the room maybe consider the implications of with climate change being involved. Like,
totally. Yep.
If there's less arable land to create and grow food, there's going to be less food. We're going to have less output as a country. Our economy, I don't know, that's kind of catastrophizing maybe, but there's huge impacts that I think probably need to dig into a little bit more as a food industry in general, but I think also just as a country.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And got another question for everybody out of that. So, do you think that food safety or being worried about food safety is becoming a luxury? If you think back to when I was at university, a healthy meal was sometimes sweet chili sauce on rice. You're more worried about calories than you are worried about, hang on, how long has this been in the fridge, or where did this actually come from? Do you see that being an issue for young people when you're coming out of school, or you're at university, or you're in your first job, you don't have much money? Is it a luxury that people don't think about?
I think in the society we live in today, both from an urban and a regional point of view too, is that we've just come from a situation on the East Coast where we've experienced another significant rainfall event, potentially linked to the change in climate and atmospherically what's happening. But now we get into a situation where it is a luxury. It is a luxury to turn the tap on. Thinking of water as a food source or as a form of sustenance for us. That turning on the tap each and every day for us here in New Zealand is a luxury for us. We know it's reasonably healthy to a standard, but also that's actually changing regionally now too. If we think back to what happened in Havelock North and the Hawke's Bay there too, now that's what's happening on the East Coast too, where the sources where we draw our water sources from in particular, but also where we feed our farms to, where we irrigate our farms to, those have been impacted. And what's the impact of those food resources on us, on the food resource that we consume, and a potential health impact? I had nothing to do with investigating the health of any of that on impacts going forward. But there's definitely opportunity to investigate that too, and it's a luxury for us to continue to consume healthy everyday food here in New Zealand. Yeah.
I think kind of related to that as well, kind of related and also completely unrelated at the same time. Like best before dates and use by dates on things, I don't know. I think there was like a little bit of a push maybe last year about maybe taking them off labels or educating the public more about the difference between a best before, which is like a sensory quality thing usually, and a use by, which is, correct me if I'm wrong though, and a use by, which is usually like a microbiological thing. If you eat that, you might get really sick. And I think also, like there's people I know who'll see a best before or whatever, and they'll look at that and see it's out of date and immediately throw it out Whereas I feel like people should probably just give it a little sniff, you know.
Scrape the mould off the jam.
That's really interesting. So I've got a friend I was with on the weekend, and to take a lot of words into one, he's very frugal, we'll call him that, right? On everything except for like ski gear or kayaking gear. He's got brand new skis, but he's busy out dumpster diving for food, right? And I was chatting to him, I was like, how does it go dumpster diving in Queenstown, right? And he says, it's awesome, I've got so many Swedes. And I said, what are you going to do with the Swedes? He's like, I have no idea. I've never cooked a Swede in my life. Yeah? And so you're kind of thinking, well, and to go back to this literacy point is, maybe that's something that our parents' generation knew better, or maybe it's something we'll learn with time and trial and error. But there's the ability to work out what to do with produce which is about to go off, or is 3/4 good, and you just need to know, do I need to just make sure I cook it in a different way? I wonder if that's something that we'll learn or something that we've missed out on learning. I don't know. But yeah, it's an interesting problem.
I think I can come in there from a different perspective too, in terms of the used by data and when it's off and not off. Still coming from a culture on the East Coast where we're still hunting deer, hunting pigs, and hanging them for a week or two to age. And we're not worried, particularly some of us aren't worried about the use by it going off by hanging in the tree or hanging in the shed, and getting that processed, or even sourcing what we call kangapito, which is rotten corn, and traditional methods like that are actually strong in microorganisms that help our gut health.
Yep.
So I think, come from a food safety point of view, are we sanitising things too much and taking away that diversity for our gut health, and eventually impacting us going forward? See, I'm talking more about health issue now. So
but it's kind of interesting, given from it putting on my food development hat. There's so many foods and people coming through with ideas for us to develop for them that are in the functional food space, and particularly with probiotics. I think is really fascinating when thinking of the way that we sanitize everything and then try to add it back in again.
Yeah.
There's probably a piece around kind of devolved responsibility and trust in the food system as well, right? As we mentioned, increasing urbanization and so on. That's not just to do with not knowing where your food comes from, but maybe you also don't prepare food as often. If you look at inner city apartments and things like that, they might have a kitchen, but do they actually use them? How much of the food is just coming from Uber Eats or going out to restaurants or so on. And so you just put faith and trust in the food system and go, well, of course it's good and whatever on the box is real, but you're not used to going and hunting for yourself, taking food and understanding how to cook and process it and understanding that side of food. And then as the population expands, how many of us have the luxury to actually go and do that? And have to be dependent on the food systems. Say you're a single mother living with teenage children in central Auckland, and you can't go pig hunting or go and collect your own kai or whatever it is that you do. Hey, some single mothers might go pig hunting. Why not? There's and people are reliant on the systems and procedures around them because they have to be, and they don't have the ability to simply go out and collect food for themselves. So they must trust the system that is there for them.
Totally, mate.
And an increasingly complicated system that it is,
yes.
Right? Yeah, very interesting. Okay, next one. Do you think that young people, or do you find food safety sexy? Would you consider it to be a profession that's worth pursuing? Do you think other people think, what I think is that we've got all of these interesting new developments in terms of technology. Precision fermentation, it's a very old technique, but being used in a very new and modern way, things like vertical farms and so on. And all of a sudden, food safety experts are going to be really, really valuable to have in all of those places. Do you think our generation finds that a sexy career option, something that they would like to pursue, or not so much?
I think not yet.
Not yet? Yeah. We need some celebrities.
Yeah. I think, again, this is an old problem. We don't value food that much anymore. If you were to look at the difference between what people spent on food versus accommodation over the last 50 years, that's massively changed. We spend an absolute fortune on accommodation now, if you can afford it at all, and aren't living in your car or whatever. And we spend very little on food. Food is supposed to be cheap and there, and you're always supposed to have it. And we're actually, facing a changing world where people, and many other people in other parts of the world, don't have access to food. There's all the classic stats around that actually we produce more than enough food in the world to feed everybody. We just can't distribute it appropriately, or don't distribute it, or we waste it, or it goes bad, or we throw it out before it's used by date. So I think if you were able to put the value back on food, I mean, maybe that's where we can learn better from Matauranga Māori and start, understanding that kai is really, really valuable and important. Then maybe you can make it, maybe if we made food sexy, maybe that's the answer. Bring back food sex. No, I didn't say that.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, when I was at university studying food technology at Massey, there were like 20 of us in my class. And if you look at how many people there are doing engineering or becoming a lawyer or a doctor, like, I'm biased, but I consider food science to be kind of up there in terms of importance. Like, you're providing the food for the nation and elsewhere. It should have more value and importance on it, but it's hard enough to get younger people into food anyway. I mean, the classes behind us, and I don't know what the stats are at like Auckland or AUT or any of the other universities, like all the classes after us were smaller and smaller, and then they got rid of food technology in Albany. So it's really hard to get people interested in food for some reason, because again, I think we just kind of take food for granted. Like,
it's crazy, I love food.
I tell I'll tell people what I do for a job, and they're like, oh, I never thought someone did that. And I'm like, why? How do you think it ends up in the supermarket? But it's just, people don't think about it, so it's not thought about generally.
It's interesting, like, I studied law because I watched Suits, but what's the alternative for food? I mean, Country Calendar was fantastic, but that's not on Netflix.
Bake Off.
No, it isn't. It
Bake
isn't.
Off. Yeah.
Or Snack
fair
Masters.
point. Okay, right. So final question. It could be as brief or as long as you like. Do you think there is a generational? That was yes or no is good. Do you think there's a generational divide and towards the attitude towards food safety? That's the biggest question for us.
Just one word?
You can have 5.
It depends. No.
Okay. All right.
No, but I think it's widening. I think it's not a new thing.
Okay.
Yeah, certainly not a new thing, but it is existing both regionally, nationally, locally, but also culturally too, in terms of how we understand food. One being, I guess all cultures, food is our main gathering point. But that's why we're getting hurried up to go right away, because we've got lunch straight after this. So it's so important.
It's so important. Oh, thank you very much, everybody, and go get a round of applause for